Former Arkansas Razorback pitcher James Teague with the Teague Law Firm joining us on a Friday, as usual. How you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Is there any edge being home when you're waiting to see if there's going to be a game? Does it matter at all? Because you know, with you in Arkansas, you had to wait on the road a few times too.
Yeah, I think it's definitely better at home. You've got all your own facilities, and you got all your stuff, your locker. You can go downstairs, go to the gym. Oh, here's our fridge. Here's the training staff room. I mean, you're just more familiar and more comfortable, more amenities to kind of buy the time until we find out yes or no on the game.
James, they played 30 games, a little bit past the halfway point of the season. I saw, I was on the Razorback Daily yesterday with Quinn and with Matt Zimmerman, and I brought out something that I thought was special about each aspect of baseball for this team. In the field, they don't make a lot of mistakes in the field. When it comes to hitting, that's explosive. They can have a big inning, almost any time, or you just got to wait for it to happen, and it happens a lot. For the pitching staff, it's strike throwers. And the thing that stands out here for me is that, and this is great for a team that's so good in the field, it's a pitching staff of strike throwers. There may be a couple guys that might have some issue commanding their stuff the way that they'd want to. I think those are younger pitchers. Fouch, I think, would be the other one. But for the most part, you got to earn your way on base against just about every pitcher there.
Yeah, I think you're right. And there's a lot of balance between kind of the starters that have separated themselves, showing the ability. We saw Gackle had some struggles. He seems to be kind of back in the saddle now. But you're getting depth out of your starters. Root has bounced back great since Ole Miss. Vital Cheese, similar story. But then you've also got some middle guys who can give you some depth. Bybee has really come on. Jimenez has really come on that can give you some depth. And then you've got Wiggins there on the back end of someone who can be kind of that prototypical, closer type guy. Obviously, he needs some more experience, and he's still got some stuff to prove. But I think the pitching staff has kind of got all the dynamics there to be a formidable staff because you've got all the pieces in terms of long, short, and closing.
I was talking with Coach Matt Hobbs about this a couple of days ago. In his last start, Root threw mostly fastballs. And for a guy that I've seen him win games off his curveball and off his changeup and off his cutter to throw, and I don't remember what the percentage was, but it was plus 50% fastballs, and was still throwing 96 on his 100th pitch. And if you're looking for why Ben Bybee has become more successful from this year compared to the last 2 years, it's velocity. His velocity has jumped, and it's a 3 mile to 6 mile an hour difference. And James is someone that, you sat in the 90s quite a bit, but then there was a time you threw harder than that. That makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I think the benefit for Bybee is I think he's kind of grown into that frame. He's found ways to leverage that frame and not be, not fighting his body, so to speak. I think that's why the scouts love the big, tall guys, because they always have the promise of if we can just get things to sync up in this body, and I think he's 6'3" or 6'4", 225, it's going to be a lot easier for that jump to happen. For me, I had to change everything, do a lot of weighted balls, kind of push the envelope more because I didn't have the benefit of that frame. But to me, Bybee looks like he's kind of growing into his body. He's learning how to leverage that size that he has. And it seems the same effort to me. It doesn't look like he's overthrowing. He's actually just finding ways to be efficient and throw harder and in turn throw more strikes. He's always had pretty good off-speed stuff, but when you're mid-90s and you're reaching out that far because you're 6'3", your off-speed stuff just gets even better. I think that's what we're seeing with him.
You see Root likes to smell the baseball. Now we've seen him doing it on the mound, and he even talked about it on it was also on the Razorback Daily a couple of days ago, and we brought it up yesterday. A freshly rubbed up baseball definitely has a unique smell to it, but I don't remember right. To me, that's a very left-handed thing, James.
Yeah, I mean, there is something about that rub that has a smell to it. When you get a fresh ball and it's got a little bit of that tack on it, there is certainly a smell to it. Now, it's kind of similar to like you're going catfishing and you put some of the stink bait on there, like in the old days. It doesn't quite smell that bad. It has a little bit of a very specific smell to it, but I would say most people wouldn't love it, but to each their own. If it helps you, throw 7.2 innings and strike out 7 against a good Vanderbilt team. You keep smelling it.
Yeah, that had to feel good watching them play as well as they did at Vandy. First series win there since 2010. First sweep there since 94. And teams that win series in Oxford, and I think that's a really good Ole Miss team. I think the jury's out on Vanderbilt, but that doesn't erase the idea that that's a really tough place to play. Some of the really good Arkansas baseball teams in the last few years have struggled to win on the road. This team has shown they can win on the road. Next week at Georgia is going to be a really tough test, too.
Yeah, I mean, I know when we were there, the way the RPI was scheduled, the road wins were not weighted quite as heavily. And so, you go take 1 of 3 on the road, but then you win a series at home or you sweep at home, you're going to come out in the positive there. So for me, it's really about winning at home and then trying to pick up series on the road. If you drop one here or there, it's really okay in terms of your ranking and trying to be that national seed going in to have a chance to host for a super. But obviously, if you go and you win a series at Ole Miss and then you sweep at Vanderbilt, which I think were ranked 14th at the time, you're building a lot of equity in terms of that RPI and the ranking system down the road to where you don't really have to be quite as perfect. You just got to make sure you take care of business at home.
So you brought something up I wonder about, and Dave says a lot, every win counts the same. But that's only true in terms of the standings in the SEC, because every win does not count the same in terms of the RPI ranking. Is that anything that anybody that's wearing a uniform outside of maybe a coach would think about?
I certainly thought about it. I think it's hard to go beat a top 10 team on the road 2 out of 3. That's a really hard thing to do. And I think sometimes you think like, oh, we're better than that team and we should have won or this or we didn't catch that break. Sometimes breaks seem to fall against you when you're on the road, and momentum is a serious thing in sports. And so I think Van Horn's gotten to the point where the expectation now is if we play our game and our guys do what they're supposed to do, we should have a good chance to win the SEC, at which point all the wins do mean the same. And if we do that, then as a byproduct, we're going to be a top 8 national seed. So maybe that's kind of the line of thinking of saying all wins are the same that he's looking at it.
James Teague, former Arkansas pitcher with us from the Teague Law Firm. I saw Parker Coyle has gone down with an injury. They think he may be able to come back in May. And it sucks for Parker because he'd broken through, and it was sometimes the first guy out of the pen on a Friday, and might have been this last weekend had it not been for this back injury. But it does open up opportunities. Colin Fisher has pitched some on the weekends, but Cole Gibler has stood out when he's pitched, James.
Yeah, he has. I mean, he's come in, he's done a great job. You kind of, sometimes guys come in, you're like, I don't recognize this name as much. What am I going to get? And they throw one good here and then there, and you're like, okay, I'd like to see this guy some more, and they just work their way into the lineup. The season always ends a lot different than where it starts. And, guys got to step up and make the most of their opportunities, and I think that's one thing that he has really done. It really stinks for Parker. I think he was sub-1 ERA. He was really getting a lot of outs. He was throwing strikes, kind of building confidence. And, on the injury side, I think one thing that I never appreciated until I started playing was you take 2 or 3 weeks off. Okay, I'm healed, but now I got to take a week or 2 to get back in pitching shape. The ramping back on time is just as critical as the healing time. And that's why as a pitcher, there really are no sure injuries because, I was only hurt for 2 weeks, but now it takes me 2 weeks to get back in game shape. Just the way it goes with throwing.
Yeah. James, the team's playing incredibly good baseball right now. I still sense a feeling amongst fans, not all of them, but some, that they're waiting for the sky to fall, waiting for something to happen, and I think people feel that way because of experience in some cases, but I kind of have seen enough to believe that I think this team is as good as anybody else in the country. And I'll tell you one thing that stands out about them that I think makes them really difficult to pitch to. It doesn't matter if it's righty or lefty for almost everybody in the lineup. In fact, they hit lefties better than they do righties, and they're still hitting righties really well. As a pitcher, when you know that the guy you're facing, doesn't matter if he hits the same side you throw or the other side, he always puts together a good at-bat.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes it harder, especially out of the bullpen, to try to match up on guys. You don't have like oh, my starter got me through the 6th. Let's match up right on left, 7th and 8th, get to our closer, but leave the 9th. It's harder to follow that script. I think some of the skepticism from fans is fair because the jury is still out, so to speak, and whether play can continue at the same rate that it did in the regular season and the postseason. I mean, that's just a product of the last couple of years. So I think that's a fair criticism, but I do think that this team has a little bit more to it, to where if they do 80 or 90% of what they're doing now, they're still going to be very competitive in the postseason compared to some of the blowouts we saw, in years past with K-State and others.
Before we get into the law, Scott had texted in and wanted to know your thoughts on pitching to different catchers. Zane Becker is getting starts midweek. We don't see Zane on the weekends. Ryder Helfrich catching the weekends. Does it matter too much one to the other? Ryder is a sophomore, Zane's a freshman, and Arkansas catchers for the most part are calling the game. So you got to trust whoever's back there no matter what, even if the coach is calling the game. But when the catcher's calling the game, it changes things.
Yeah, catcher matters a lot. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There's kind of a vibe or an ambiance, especially when the pitcher is throwing to their spot. It's almost like the catcher knows what pitch I want to throw before I call it. It's really very similar to golfer and caddy. You hear Jordan Spieth and his caddy talking back and forth, and you're like, they just know they're so much on the same page, and they vibe off of it, and they feed off of that energy. A lot of that same applies to the pitcher catcher. Now, you don't always get to pick your guy. The pitcher's not drawing the lineup, and so you make work with what you got, but it is an important factor for sure.
BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for betting on all the madness. Even if your bracket is busted, BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with a free Sweet 16 bracket and live betting on every remaining tournament game. With the largest selection of odds on everything from college basketball to MLB, NHL, and MMA, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every Cinderella story to every hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here.